Hey, what's up, guys? Back again with another vlog. It is 3:26 in the morning. I have a shift at 12, so I should probably be sleeping. Today I had an afternoon shift from like 4:15 to 9:15, so like a 5-hour shift. But it felt really long for me. Like, I don't know, I felt tired. Maybe it's because I was like bed rotting in the morning. Like, I woke up at 10, got out of bed at like 2. I was in bed for a while. Um, yeah, I don't know. I was just really tired today. Um, but yeah, I mean, I still did my job. I still did work. Um, yeah, not really anything interesting today. I've just been listening to some Isaac music, The Binding of Isaac. Oh, I'm obsessed with music from this one official soundtrack from a mod called Anti-Birth. So, if you don't know, The Binding of Isaac is a video game. There's and there's two games. So there's the original Binding of Isaac, which is like the Flash game. No one plays that anymore. But then there's like the Binding of Isaac Rebirth, which has like a bunch of DLC, like purchasable DLC added on to it. And that one, there's a mod, like a community created mod called Anti-Birth, which added like a whole bunch of content to the game, like new bosses, new items, new areas, like a lot of new stuff. But they also added a lot of new music, for those new areas and for old areas as well. And I am obsessed with the music. It just hits different than the official music that was made by the devs of the game. Like, the mod has better music in my opinion than like the other music. I don't know. It's nostalgic to me because I remember playing the mod because it was free, you know, whereas the DLC you have to pay for it. So I was like, okay, well, I played that mod a lot and I loved it so much. And it was so memorable. And that music still has like a special place in my heart. Just because I don't know, like it brings a very certain emotion, like melancholy. And I love it so much. And yeah, so I've been listening to that and it makes me feel like inspired. I don't know, because it's like such good music. It makes me feel motivated to, be creative because of how good it is. Um, like, I was like, oh man, I could write a book listening to this music. That's how good it is. I just love it so much. And so I've just been like going through my Spotify, like listening to all these songs. Um, and yeah, other than that, I finished season 4 of Two Broke Girls today. It's pretty good. I like watching it kind of like in the background, to be honest, while I do other things. But it's still very entertaining. It's still enjoyable. The humor is a bit outdated, but I like the storyline that they have going on. I think it's interesting. And yeah, I didn't really do much else today, to be honest. But man, I should really get back into writing. The thing is, in order to be a good writer, you have to be a reader, an avid reader. And I hate reading. Like, I know this is crazy coming from an English major. I don't like reading, guys. Can I be for real? I just don't have like the attention span to read a book. Sometimes I can just sit down and read a book, but I'd rather do other things. If I'm completely honest, I would rather play video games than read a book. I would rather watch a show than read a book. because reading takes a lot more mental effort in order to enjoy it. And after a day of work, I kind of don't want to do that. But it is still good to read, let's be real. There's a lot of books that I want to read, but I just don't have the motivation to read them. I want to read Pride and Prejudice. I haven't read that. I really should read that, considering it was one of the books that I had to read for like a class a couple years ago that I failed, obviously, because I didn't read the book. And there's just like a lot of classical books that I just haven't read. I've like never read anything from Shakespeare. I just never read that stuff in high school. I don't know. Like there's a lot of stuff that I feel like I should have read in high school, and I just never did. I never read Shakespeare. Like, I don't know, never read Lord of the Flies or whatever. I feel like that's a common one in high school. Never read that. I want to read Dante's Inferno. I want to read Charles Dickens' Bleak House, because I was supposed to read that, and I did partially read it for one of my classes. Not this year, but a year prior, where I was doing really bad mentally and I failed. I want to read that book just to prove to myself that I can do hard things and that I can read difficult, boring things. I want to read Iliad. Homer's Iliad. I want to read that. What else? I could read Dracula from start to finish. For my class, I only had to read to chapter 5. Could read it to the end. Could read Frankenstein to the end. Jekyll and Hyde. Like a lot of these things I just never read. And I know, well, now that I've done the class, I know what Jekyll and Hyde is about. I know what Dracula is about. I know what Frankenstein is about. But I've never actually read the texts from start to finish, because in class you only read a snippet just to get an idea, because obviously you don't have time to read fully all of these novels and all of these stories. You only read parts of them, unless it's a class specifically devoted to one novel, which is what my seminar class last semester was. We read all of Middlemarch, but that's like a whole class devoted to one book and close reading it, right? You can't do that with several books in one class, that would be just unrealistic to expect an undergraduate uni student to do all that. So yeah, there's a lot of stuff I want to read. There was this one other book I'm trying to remember that I wanted to read. I can't remember the title of it, but yeah, I have a lot of stuff I want to read, but I just don't get around to it. And I don't know how I ever will get around to reading, I've also thought about reading the Bible. I'm not religious, but I just feel like the Bible is an important thing to read, although I hear the Bible is pretty darn long, and I don't know if I can bring myself to read all that. I did read parts of Genesis, the very beginning, because I was doing an analysis on something relating to that in one of my classes. But reading the entire Bible is going to take ages, so I don't know if I could ever do that. Considering there are whole regions of education relating to just theology and religion, so I don't know, that's a whole nother thing. But I find that religion comes up a lot in my English classes, like a lot. Like it is so common, it's crazy. Like literally any classic literature, there's always some sort of religious tie to it. And I think the reason for that is because historically speaking, religious people were like the first ones to have access to like books and like reading and writing. Like the very first texts ever were religious in nature. So it makes sense why a lot of literature is religious, because its roots come from religion. And like a lot of like the clergy people, the clergymen, back in the day, religious people were the only people who could read or write. And it was for religious purposes, like in like the 1500s, like in like, well, like even earlier, like 800, I think is like where like the first, like Caedmon's hymn, I think is like the very first like text that we have. It's like what, like 800 something, the year 800 or earlier. It's like really early on, and it's like completely different than the English we have today. Obviously it's like barely decipherable. It's like old English, so but it has been translated, which is cool. But yeah, a lot of it's religious. Back in the day, a lot of people just had spoken word over everything. People didn't really read. Everything was transmitted orally. It was only religious people who had like texts and stuff, kind of like the Bible. So yeah, I think that's interesting to think about. And it really makes me think like what I'm doing as an English student, like how much of what I'm learning is actually relevant today. I mean, it's good to know the history for sure, to see where the roots of English came from. And I don't know, I feel like I'm much more tolerant of religion now than I was in the past. Like before I went to university, I was much more like, I am atheist, completely against religion. As a gay guy, I always had a prejudice against religion because I always thought, religious people or like Christians were homophobic. Like that's a fear that I had for a while. I wanted to separate myself from religion mainly because I was afraid and I wanted to protect myself, right? Because I was closeted, and I was afraid that, religious people are homophobic. That's what I thought, which obviously isn't true. Not all religious people are homophobic. But that's mainly why I had such like a bias against religion for the longest time. But now that I'm like constantly talking about God and religion, I'm like, okay, I'm getting used to it now. And I think there's a lot of interesting stuff that comes from religion. Like there's a lot of interesting ideas and topics that we can learn from religious texts or stuff that mentions like God or religion or whatever. It is everywhere, especially in like romantic literature. It is so prevalent. It's kind of crazy. It's like everywhere. In like, more historical texts. And I don't really know where I'm going with this, but I just think it's a really interesting thing to think about. Seeing like these themes and thinking about them. Because a big thing that I like learned this year is like the Enlightenment era versus the Romantic era, the age of industrialization and the Victorian era. Like, there was a big shift from Romantic literature, which focused on like the illogical and nature, to more rational thinking, more rational writing from the Enlightenment era, which is like post French Revolution, or like during the French Revolution, I should say, where there's like a shift from romantic writing and nature. And don't get it twisted. Just because I say romantic doesn't mean love. Back then, romantic didn't mean love. So, not all romantic literature has to deal with love. Although unrequited love is a common theme, it's not the only theme. A lot of it just has to do with sensibility over rationality. And when I say sensibility, I mean high emotions, sensationalized writing. And a lot of that comes from God. Like, a lot of it was just like nature and how nature is connected to God, and how that's inherently illogical or irrational, because in terms of like Enlightenment era, where everything is materialistic, logical, scientific, there's a big shift there, right? From like God and spirituality to these more like concrete, objective sciences and ways of thinking. I'm just thinking, like, what caused that shift, you know? And I think part of it has to do with politics, mainly the French Revolution, I'm guessing, because like whatever was happening, it wasn't really benefiting the common people. I could be completely wrong on this, by the way. I'm just like saying what I think I learned in class, but I don't know. I'm ranting for too long. I should go to sleep. This vlog is way too long. Anyways, I just think it's interesting to talk about. Main reason I'm talking about this is because the music I'm listening to is from The Binding of Isaac. It's religious in nature. Like the game deals a lot with like religious themes and stuff, you know, like hell and heaven and, you know, Satan and angels and all that stuff, you know. And I think it's like an interesting aesthetic. And it's really interesting to think about, you know, especially as someone who isn't personally religious. It makes me think, like, you know, what is sinful versus what is prideful, or like what is good and bad, you know. I feel like that's a big question that I have, you know, in my day-to-day life. Like, am I really doing the right thing? What is the right thing to do, you know? What defines our morals and ethics in society? I guess that's the question I'm thinking about. I'm just kind of having this like brain blast where I'm just like, oh my gosh, what is the meaning of the world and life? I don't know. It's kind of existentialist in nature, but anyways, rant over. I'm gonna go to bed now. I need to think on this. Talk to y'all tomorrow. Bye.